My name is Maya, and I believe that a good marketing strategy is like a ghost story. It has to be meticulously crafted, built on a foundation of deep human truth, and paced so perfectly that the audience doesn't even realize they're haunted until the very end. For 3 years at Sterling and Vance, one of the most prestigious advertising firms in the country, I had been a diligent, quiet architect of such stories. I was good at my job, respected for my work ethic, and consistently flying just under the radar of the top brass. Project Chimera was supposed to change that. It was my magnum opus, a campaign I had conceived from a single, electrifying spark of an idea and nurtured for 6 solid months. It was for our biggest client, a legacy tech brand named Veridian, and my strategy was designed to resurrect their aging image for a new generation. I lived and breathed Chimera. My life became a landscape of data points, consumer psychology reports, and late-night creative sessions. I poured my soul into every slide of the presentation deck, every word of the pitch. It was, I knew without a shred of arrogance, the best work of my career. My direct manager, David Miller, was the sole audience for my progress. Each week, I would sit in his sterile, glass-walled office and present my latest developments. And each week, he would greet my passion with a frustratingly cool indifference. He'd lean back in his chair, steeple his fingers, and offer vague, dismissive feedback that felt like trying to punch smoke. "It's a good start, Maya," he'd say, looking at a slide that represented 80 hours of my work. "But it's just not quite there yet. It needs more punch." He never offered a single concrete suggestion, never engaged with the material on a meaningful level. He was a wall of passive resistance, and I, in my naivety, thought it was a test. I thought he was pushing me to make the work even better. So I'd retreat to my cubicle, fueled by coffee and a burning desire to finally impress him, and I would dig even deeper. The final presentation was a work of art. It was bold, insightful, and backed by an unassailable wall of data. I sent it to him on a Friday afternoon with a note that read, "David, I think this is it. I'm really proud of this." He replied with a curt, one-word email. "Noted." The betrayal came the following Tuesday. It was a high-level board meeting with the executive team and our formidable CEO, Ms. Evelyn Davenport. I was invited to attend, an invitation I assumed meant David was finally going to give me my moment, let me present a small piece of my own work. I took a seat in the back of the room, my heart thrumming with a nervous excitement. David took the floor. The title slide of his presentation appeared on the massive screen. Project Chimera, a new vision for VRIDIN. My blood ran cold. He began to speak, and the words that came out of his mouth were my words. He presented my slides, animated with a flourish I had programmed myself. He quoted from my strategic brief, using the exact, carefully chosen phrasing I had labored over for weeks. He was performing my work, my soul, as if it were his own. The room was captivated. When he finished, there was a beat of stunned silence, and then the boardroom erupted into a standing ovation. Ms. Davenport, a woman not known for effusive praise, was beaming. "David," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "That was not just a home run. That was a grand slam. This is exactly the kind of bold, visionary thinking this firm needs. Effective immediately, I'm promoting you to Director of Strategy." I sat there in the back of the room, completely invisible. The applause was a deafening roar that seemed to mock the silent scream trapped in my throat. He had not just stolen my work, he had erased me from my own story. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I simply sat there as the blood in my veins turned to ice and I began to plot. I wasn't going to HR. I was going to war. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, the city lights a distant, indifferent glitter. The fury that had frozen me in that boardroom began to thaw, replaced by a white-hot rage that was terrifyingly clear. I replayed the meeting in my head, every stolen word, every triumphant glance David shot toward the CEO. I saw the condescending smirk he'd worn in our check-ins for what it was, the mask of a common thief. Complaining to human resources was a fool's errand. I had seen it happen before. A junior designer named Kevin had accused a senior director of stealing his concept. It became a messy, protracted affair of he said, she said. Kevin, unable to prove his case definitively, was labeled a troublemaker and quietly managed out of the company 6 months later. The system wasn't designed to protect people like me. It was designed to protect people like David. No, my response had to be as public and as undeniable as his theft. It couldn't be a matter of opinion or interpretation. It had to be a public execution, on a stage of my own choosing. The opportunity arrived in my inbox the next morning, nestled between junk mail and meeting reminders. It was a company-wide email announcing the quarterly all-hands meeting, scheduled for 2 weeks from today. The agenda listed a series of departmental updates, a financial overview, and a final keynote presentation. The speaker was David Miller, the newly minted director of strategy, who would be presenting his groundbreaking campaign, Project Chimera, to all 500 employees of the firm. The universe had just handed me the stage. Now I needed to figure out how to hijack the show. My mind immediately went to the IT department, the unsung, perpetually overworked heroes of Sterling and Vance. They were sequestered in a windowless room in the basement, a place most of the marketing executives avoided as if it were radioactive. But I had always made a point to be friendly with them. I learned their names, asked about their weekends, and brought them a box of premium donuts every month. It wasn't a calculated strategy, it was just common decency. But now, that decency was about to become my greatest strategic asset. My main point of contact was a young, brilliant network engineer named Ben was a genius with a sardonic sense of humor who was perpetually annoyed by the technological incompetence of the people whose passwords he was always resetting. A few months back, he had been struggling to create a compelling presentation for his daughter's STEM fair project. I had stayed late one evening and helped him design the slides, adding animations and graphics that made his daughter's project on hydroponics look like a TED Talk. He had been absurdly grateful. "Maya, you're a lifesaver," he'd said. "If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you let me know." It was time to call in that favor. I didn't tell him the whole truth, of course. That would put him in an impossible position. Instead, I crafted another kind of story. I found him in the basement, looking stressed as usual. "Ben," I said, offering him a coffee, "I need your help with something. It's for the all-hands meeting, David's big presentation." His eyes narrowed with interest. "He's not the most tech-savvy guy," I said, which was a massive understatement. "And this is a huge moment for him. I'm terrified he's going to mess up the AV or click the wrong thing." I was hoping I could be the one to assist him at the tech podium, just to make sure everything runs smoothly. "Could you make sure I'm the one assigned to that station?" Ben took a sip of the coffee and smirked. "You want to babysit Miller's PowerPoint? Be my guest. I'll put you on the schedule. Anything to avoid hearing him ask me why the clicky thingy isn't working." The first piece of the trap was set. Now I had 2 weeks to build the perfect weapon. The next 2 weeks were an exercise in psychological warfare, waged primarily against myself. On the surface, I had to be the diligent, professional employee. I congratulated David on his promotion with a smile so convincing it felt like a physical strain. He accepted it with a magnanimous nod, as if he were a king accepting tribute from a loyal subject. "Thanks, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Glad to see you're a team player." There's a lot you can learn from how I handled the final stages of the Chimera pitch. The urge to scream was a living thing in my throat, but I swallowed it down and replaced it with a placid, agreeable expression. "Of course, David. I'm looking forward to supporting your vision." His arrogance was my armor. He saw me as a defeated subordinate, a non-threat. He had no idea he was talking to his executioner. My days were spent performing my duties with a robotic efficiency. But my nights belonged to the plan. My apartment became a war room. My target was not David, but the truth. My weapon was my own meticulous, obsessive nature. I created a new folder in my personal cloud drive, a drive completely separate from the company servers. I named it, with a touch of theatrical flair, Project Chimera Maya's Originals. Into this folder, I gathered my evidence. It was a digital breadcrumb trail of creation. There were the initial brainstorming documents, dated 6 months prior. There were the dozens of drafts of the strategic brief, each showing the evolution of the ideas. There were the email chains with the data analytics team, where I had specifically requested the datasets that formed the core of the campaign's argument. Then, I found the masterstroke. I had been in the habit of using a voice memo app on my phone to record my thoughts and ideas while commuting. I had dozens of audio files, all time-stamped, where I talked through the Chimera concept. Listening to them was eerie. "Okay, new thought for the Viridian pitch," my own voice would say from the past. "What if we don't call it a rebranding? What if we call it a reintroduction? Frame it as reintroducing a classic to a new audience. It was the exact linguistic hook that David had used in the boardroom, the one Ms. Davenport had specifically praised. The final piece of evidence was the most damning. It was the email David had sent me after I submitted the final deck, the one that simply said, "Noted." I placed it in the folder, but then I found an even better one. It was an email from a month earlier, a reply to one of my detailed progress reports. "Good start," he had written, "but this needs a lot of work before it's presentable. I'm not yet convinced by the core premise." It was the perfect encapsulation of his role in the project, a dismissive, creatively bankrupt gatekeeper. I organized the files with the precision of a prosecutor preparing for a capital case. I rehearsed the sequence, the clicks I would make, the order in which the evidence would appear. The story had to be told in 60 seconds without a single word from me. It had to be a silent, brutal, and irrefutable revelation. All the while, David swaggered through the office, basking in his unearned glory. He delegated his old responsibilities to me, treating me as his personal assistant. He was a man so consumed by his own lie that he had come to believe it was the truth. He had no idea that in the quiet cubicle down the hall, the ghost of his career was being meticulously prepared for its final, haunting appearance. The day of the all-hands meeting arrived with a cinematic sense of foreboding. The sky was a bruised, heavy gray, and a nervous energy crackled through the office. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing a simple, professional dark blue dress. I wanted to look competent and unremarkable, the perfect stagehand for the drama I was about to direct. My heart hammered against my ribs with a rhythm of fear and exhilaration. This was an incredible risk. A stunt like this could get me fired and blacklisted from the industry. There was no safety net. But the alternative, to let him get away with it, to swallow the injustice and watch him build a career on the back of my work, was a fate worse than unemployment. It was an erasure of my own professional soul. I arrived at the auditorium an hour early. It was a large, corporate space with tiered seating for 500, a massive stage, and 3 gigantic projection screens. Ben from IT was already there, setting up the tech podium. He gave me a knowing, sympathetic look. "Ready for the big show?" he asked, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "As I'll ever be," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He handed me a laptop. "This is the primary machine for the presentation," he explained. "It's already linked to the main projectors, but I've also set up a secondary input. There's a small, unmarked button under the console here." He showed me a tiny, discreet black button. "You press that and the input switches to a receiver linked to this tablet." He handed me a tablet. "Whatever is on this screen will be mirrored on the projectors. Press it again and it switches back to the laptop. It's a seamless override. We use it for live demos. He'll never even know what happened." I looked at the small black button. It was my trigger, my detonator. The fate of my career and David's rested on that tiny switch. "Ben," I said, my voice low, "thank you. I owe you more than donuts for this." He just shrugged, but his eyes were serious. "Some people deserve to get what's coming to them. Just try not to burn the whole place down." I spent the next hour at the podium, running a series of innocuous diagnostic checks. I logged into my personal cloud drive on the tablet and queued up the Maya's Originals folder, then minimized the window. Anyone watching, it looked like I was just ensuring the Wi-Fi was stable. Employees began to file in, the room filling with the low hum of chatter. I saw my colleagues, the executive team, and finally Ms. Davenport, who took her seat in the center of the front row. Then David made his entrance. He didn't just walk in. He strode in, shaking hands, clapping people on the back, radiating the smug aura of a conquering hero. He came over to the podium to check on me. "Everything ready, Maya?" he asked, not even making eye contact, his attention on the crowd. "We can't have any technical glitches for this. It's too important." "Everything is perfect, David," I said, my voice a placid sea above the storm raging within me. "You won't have to worry about a thing." He nodded, satisfied, and went to take his seat on the stage. The lights dimmed. The company's sizzle reel played. My hand rested on the cool metal of the console, my finger hovering just above the small, black button. It was time for the ghost story to begin. The company's CFO finished his presentation on quarterly earnings, a dry but necessary prelude to the main event. A polite ripple of applause filled the auditorium. The vice president of HR stepped up to the lectern. "And now," she said, her voice amplified by the speakers, It gives me immense pleasure to introduce a man whose strategic vision is already making waves across the industry. Here to walk us through the revolutionary new campaign for Veridian, our newly promoted Director of Strategy, David Miller. The applause was thunderous. The whole company was celebrating my work, and they didn't even know it. David rose from his chair on the stage, beaming. He walked to the center of the stage, soaking in the adoration. He looked like a man who truly believed he deserved it. I felt a profound, chilling clarity. There was no room for doubt. He had made his choice. Now he would face the consequences. Thank you, he said into the microphone, his voice smooth and confident. It's an honor to be here to share with you all a project that I believe will not only redefine our largest client, but will also set a new standard for this entire firm. A project I call Chimera. He held a small remote in his hand and pointed it at the screen. Let's begin. He clicked the button. My heart felt like it stopped. My finger pressed the small, black button under the console. For a split second, the massive screens behind him flickered, the seamless transition from one input to another completely invisible. He was expecting the sleek, animated logo for Project Chimera. He was expecting his name to appear in bold letters beneath it. Instead, what appeared on all three screens, in crystal-clear high definition, was a perfect mirror of my tablet's screen. It was a clean, simple desktop view of my personal cloud drive, and in the center of it was a single, starkly named folder. Project Chimera Maya's Originals. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. David stared at the screen, his confident smile faltering. He looked over at me at the tech podium with a flicker of annoyance, assuming it was a simple mistake. Couldn't possibly comprehend the truth yet. I met his gaze for a fraction of a second, my expression perfectly neutral, and then I turned my attention to the tablet. With a slow, deliberate tap of my finger, I opened the folder. The audience, all 500 of them, now saw a meticulously organized list of files. My finger moved again, highlighting the first file. Chimera Initial Brainstorm Notes DocX. The timestamp was clearly visible next to it, April 14th, 6 months ago. I then highlighted an audio file. Veridian Reintroduction Concept, M4A, time-stamped in May. Then an email chain with the analytics team from June. With each tap, another piece of the timeline, my timeline, fell into place. The murmuring in the crowd died down, replaced by a tense, breathless silence. People were starting to understand. They were leaning forward in their seats. I saw Ms. Davenport in the front row, her eyes narrowed, fixed on the screen. David had turned completely toward the screens now, his back to the audience. His face, illuminated by the glow of my evidence, was a mask of dawning horror. He was finally understanding. He was the ghost, and this was his haunting. The final act was delivered in absolute silence. My finger hovered over the last file in the list. It was an email. The subject line was Chimera Progress Update. The sender was me. The recipient was David Miller. I tapped it open. The email preview expanded to fill the screens, the text large enough for everyone, even in the back row, to read. It was a polite, professional update from a month ago, detailing my latest breakthroughs on the project strategy. And at the bottom was David's reply, his words now a damning indictment broadcast for the entire company to see. Good start, but this needs a lot of work before it's presentable. I'm not yet convinced by the core premise. The silence in the auditorium was no longer just quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating void. It was the sound of 500 people collectively holding their breath. It was the sound of a career ending. In that moment, I pressed the small black button under the console again. The screen flickered, and the sleek Project Chimera logo finally appeared, with David's name proudly displayed beneath it. The scheduled presentation was ready to go, but it was too late. The story had already been told. David stood frozen on the stage, a statue of a man. The color had drained from his face, leaving a pale, sickly sheen under the stage lights. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked from the screens to the audience, his eyes wide with panic, and he saw not the adoring faces from moments ago, but a sea of stunned, accusing stares. Then a single, sharp sound cut through the silence. It was Ms. Davenport, the CEO, standing up from her front row seat. She was not looking at the screen. She was looking directly at David, and her expression was one of absolute cold fury. "David," she said. Her voice, calm and clear, needed no microphone. It carried across the silent room like the sea. Rack of a whip. "My office, now." She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The two words were a death sentence. She turned and walked out of the auditorium without a backward glance. Two security guards who had been standing discreetly by the exits moved toward the stage. The spell was broken. A low, shocked murmur erupted through the crowd. David stumbled backward, his carefully constructed world shattering around him. He was escorted off the stage, not as a conquering hero, but as a prisoner. The auditorium was a chaotic buzz of whispers and shocked conversation. I stood at the tech podium, my heart finally starting to beat again, a wild, frantic rhythm. My career was either over or it had just begun. And then the vice president of HR, who was still on the stage looking utterly shell-shocked, seemed to receive an instruction through her earpiece. She walked unsteadily to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she stammered, "there has been a change of plans." She looked out into the crowd, her eyes scanning until they found me. "Maya," she called out, her voice echoing in the vast room. "Ms. Davenport has asked that you come to the stage. She said you should present your project." Walking from the tech podium to the center of that stage was the longest journey of my life. Every eye in the room was on me. I could feel their curiosity, their shock, their respect. When I reached the lectern, I looked out at the sea of faces, my colleagues, my peers. The fear that had been my constant companion for 2 weeks was gone, replaced by a profound and steady sense of calm. I was no longer invisible. I took a deep breath. "Good morning," I said, my voice clear and strong. "My name is Maya, and I am the creator of Project Chimera. Let me tell you about it." For the next 20 minutes, I didn't just present the campaign, I embodied it. I spoke with the passion and conviction that David could never have faked because he had never felt it. I knew the data behind every claim, the psychological reasoning behind every creative choice. I told the story of the project, my story, and I held the entire room in the palm of my hand. When I finished, the applause was not just polite or enthusiastic, it was explosive. It was a roar of approval, of vindication. People were on their feet, not because they were told to be, but because they were genuinely moved. In the front row, several of the senior executives were looking at me with a newfound, profound respect. After the meeting, I was immediately summoned to Ms. Davenport's office on the top floor. It was the first time I had ever been there. It was a corner office with a panoramic view of the city, a landscape of power. David was gone. Ms. Davenport was sitting behind a large mahogany desk, her expression unreadable. "Sit down, Maya," she said. I sat. "That was," she began, pausing to choose her words, "the most dramatic and effective resignation I have ever witnessed. You do know that you could have been fired for a stunt like that?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I did. You exposed a fraud, but you also exposed a vulnerability in our own management and oversight," she continued, her gaze intense. "You took a massive risk. Why didn't you just come to me or go to HR?" "Because I've seen what happens," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I knew that without irrefutable public proof, it would have been my word against a director's. I would have been seen as a disgruntled employee. The system, respectfully, is not built to favor the truth. It's built to avoid disruption. I chose to create a disruption that was too big to ignore." Ms. Davenport was silent for a long moment, studying me. I felt as though she were looking right through me, assessing my very character. Then, a slow, small smile touched her lips. "David Miller's employment with this firm has been terminated, effective immediately," she stated. "His promotion was based on a lie, and we do not tolerate that here. The position of Director of Strategy is therefore vacant. The leadership of the Chimera campaign is also vacant." She leaned forward. "Both are now yours, if you want them. Your official promotion is effective Monday. Today, I want you to go down to your new office, assemble your new team, David's old team, and tell them that Project Chimera is back on track, your track." I was stunned. It was more than I had dared to hope for. "Thank you, Ms. Davenport," I managed to say. "Don't thank me," she said, her expression turning serious. "You earned it, twice. Now go, you have a lot of work to do. And Maya," she added as I stood to leave, "from now on, bring that kind of audacity to your work, not just your corporate coups." Leaving the CEO's office felt like stepping back into the light after a long, dark journey. The news of David's firing and my promotion had already ripped through the company's internal chat channels. As I walked through the office, conversations would halt. People would look at me with a mixture of awe and a little bit of fear. I was no longer just Maya, the quiet strategist. I was the woman who had publicly dethroned her boss. I had become a legend, and I knew that legend could be both a shield and a cage. My new office was David's old one. It was on the executive floor, a glass-walled space with a view. It felt strange to be there, like an imposter. But as I sat in the chair behind the desk, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. This was where I belonged. My first act as director was to call a meeting with my new team. They were David's team, the people who had presumably been working with him on his project. They filed into the conference room, their expressions wary and uncertain. They didn't know if I was a hero or a tyrant. I knew that my first words to them would define my leadership. "Hi, everyone," I started, keeping my tone calm and inclusive. "I know the events of this morning were a lot to take in. And I want to be very clear about something. My issue was with one person, not with a team. I know that you are all talented professionals, and I am genuinely excited to work with you." I looked around the room, making eye contact with each of them. Project Chimera is an incredibly important initiative, and its success depends on all of us. I am the author of the strategy, but a strategy is nothing without a brilliant team to execute it. I need your ideas, your expertise, and your honesty. My door will always be open. This will be a collaborative process. We are a team. Let's get to work. I saw the tension in the room visibly ease. A few people nodded. A senior designer, a woman named Clara whom David had often dismissed, gave me a small, genuine smile. The journey to win their trust was just beginning, but it was a start. The victory was sweet, but the reality was complex. I had won the war, but now I had to govern the peace. I had to prove that I was more than just a clever act of revenge, that I was a leader worthy of the title I had claimed. The Chimera campaign, under my leadership, was a resounding success. It not only revitalized the Veridian brand, but also won a host of industry awards for Sterling and Vance. My reputation was solidified, not as a backstabber, but as a brilliant and fearless strategist. My relationship with Ben from IT became a quiet bond of mutual respect. The day after the meeting, a box containing a dozen of the most expensive artisanal donuts in the city arrived at his desk with a simple note. "For services rendered." He sent back a single emoji, a winking, smiley face. It was the only acknowledgement we ever needed. My story became a cautionary tale within the walls of the firm, a reminder that credit is not something that can be stolen without consequence. I had learned that sometimes, to fix a broken system, you can't work within it. You have to burn it down and build something new and better in its place. I had taken the biggest risk of my life, and the reward was not just a promotion or a corner office. It was the reclamation of my own voice, my own work, and my own power. And that was a victory that would last a lifetime.